Hello and welcome to Judge of Character and the first episode of 2015. Wow, man, 2015. Can you believe it? You know what this means, right? It means scientists of the world, you've got 12 months. Okay? 12 months to come up with working hoverboards, flying cars, and self-tying shoes. If I don't see any of that before the year is out, there will be hell to pay! Anyway, speaking of science fiction, the future, and technology, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be looking at the main character of the popular Japanese anime, Ghost in the Shell. But I bet most of you are wondering, what exactly is an anime? Well, I'm here to tell you.
Anime is a genre of animation that originated from and is most commonly seen in Japan. However, anime isn't limited to just the land of the rising sun and can be found in other Asian countries like Korea, but it's most commonly associated with Japan. Anime is full of many diverse visual styles, though there are a few that have become inextricably linked to the genre, such as the great big old googly eyes and Technicolor hairstyles, among other things. While it's been around since the 1960s, anime didn't get its worldwide appeal until the late 80s, early 90s, with the release of works such as Akira, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and of course, Ghost in the Shell.
Now that's just a very basic description of what exactly anime is. If you're curious and you want to know more, simply go do an internet search. Believe me, there are plenty of places on the internet that'll tell you everything you need to know. Just Google anime. But be warned, if you see any websites that have the word tentacle in the description, then for the love of all that is holy, don't click on it, please, I beg you. Trust me on this. I know what I'm talking about. Ugh. Anyway, the interesting thing about anime is that while it is considered a genre in and of itself, it actually caters to a lot of other genres. It covers everything from romance to horror stories to science fiction. And tonight, we're going to be looking at a character from an anime that is all about the sci-fi. But what exactly is Ghost in the Shell? What's it all about, anyway?
Created by Masamune Shirow as a manga, or Japanese comic, the film adaptation of Ghost in the Shell is a cyberpunk anime and an iconic work within the genre. Set in a futuristic Japan, technology has reached a point where the line between man and machine is blurry at best. Cyberization is common, with some people going so far that the only organic part of them left is their brain and part of their stem, which is housed in a case known as a cyberbrain. In fact, the vast majority of people have this, allowing them to interface with tech by simply jacking into a port on the back of their neck.
Gee, now why does this sound familiar? Now there's your first clue as to the importance of the work. It inspired the Wachowskis, who would go on to make the Matrix franchise. And depending on your opinion of those films, you can either thank or blame Ghost in the Shell. Either or. But either way, you cannot deny the influence Ghost in the Shell has had over future works.
Filled with plenty of action, science fiction, philosophy, and boobies, Ghost in the Shell became one of the works that helped to kick open the door for anime here in the West, subsequently giving us many other famous animes, as well as influencing our own films and styles of storytelling and animation. Were it not for films like Ghost in the Shell and Akira, we probably wouldn't have shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay, enough of that. Like I said, we're going to be looking at the main character of the franchise, the awesome Motoko Kusanagi. So let's not waste any more time and get right into what makes her an awesome character. But first, I should mention that, if you haven't guessed already, there's going to be a lot of Japanese terms and names in this episode. And I'm going to do my best to pronounce them correctly and explain what they mean wherever necessary. But keep in mind, I'm not Japanese. Okay, I'm American, so if I screw up a pronunciation here or there, sorry. Anyway, let's not waste any more time and get right on with the show.
So who is Motoko Kusanagi? Kusanagi is the field leader for Public Security Section 9, an anti-terrorist and anti-crime unit that specializes in cyber warfare. As the field leader, the Major, as she's commonly known, is a stoic and commanding individual who has the respect of her squad mates and is a highly trained operative. She also happens to be fully cyborg, with the only part of her still organic being her brain. As such, she's capable of physical feats that are well beyond that of normal people, including exceptional agility, increased strength and speed, and unwavering accuracy. Plus, she's sexy as hell.
That may seem like a lowbrow joke, but it is actually going to be relevant later in this episode, so stifle the giggling. Anyway, as always, let's start this character study off by looking at the personality of the character, which leads us to an issue.
Due to the popularity of the original manga or comic, Ghost in the Shell has been adapted numerous times to film and television, and in each adaptation we're given a version of the Major that differs in some way from the others, almost always in the personality.
What this means is that while the character has essentially remained the same in the various adaptations, certain elements of her personality change with each new incarnation.
For example, in the original manga, the Major was definitely more humorous in her behavior, often trading good-humored insults with her team, and being a general wise-ass, only becoming more serious as events escalated. However, in the film adaptation, the Major was almost entirely dead serious, with only occasional bits of sarcasm and dry humor. Then there was the TV anime standalone complex, which merged the film and manga personalities to create a blend of the two, edging more towards the serious side of things.
Because of this, it's a little difficult to pin down exactly what it is about the Major's personality that makes her a memorable character. As a result, when it comes to her personality, we're going to have to look at what remains constant throughout the various adaptations.
The core element of the Major is undoubtedly her stoicism. While the Major does have a sense of humor, and does display it when the situation calls for it, for the most part she's a serious character. This makes sense when you consider the nature of her job. On a regular basis, Kusanagi is dealing with criminals of all kinds, and is often getting tied up in some sort of major intrigue. And then there's the philosophical quandaries she finds herself in when it comes to matters of humanity and how it relates in a world where man and machine are so closely tied together.
In the end, this is a matter of personal preference. Some people might like film Kusanagi over TV Kusanagi, and still others might like the manga version over the TV version. Either way, it helps, because if you don't like one version of the character, you've got others to choose from. The only downside I can see to this being someone gives the character a shot in, let's say, the movie, but they don't like it, so they don't go and check out the other version because the one that they tried left a bad taste in their mouth. But, yeah, this is a minor gripe, so it's really not that much to worry myself over. Well, anyway, while the personality of the character might be a little hard to understand, one thing that's not is her status as an action woman.
Ghost in the Shell is known for a lot of things, including being highly philosophical on a number of topics. But it's also known for high-octane action that includes car chases, gunfights, tanks, guns, bullets, explosions!
Okay, so yeah, Ghost in the Shell has a lot of action, and the Major is often smack dab in the middle of it.
Since the show is about an anti-terrorist group, and since the Major is pretty much the central character, this is a given. But how the Major is a badass is what makes her awesome. As mentioned, the Major is full cyborg, so her entire body, with the exception of her brain, is basically military-grade hardware. She's capable of exceptional physical feats, and we see her do them on a regular basis. Some minor examples include diving off of buildings, close quarters combat, etc. Then there are her hacking skills. The Major is a master hacker, able to get around all sorts of firewalls and other techno mumbo-jumbo that I don't understand.
With all that combined, I think we can all agree that the Major is a badass. But some of you are probably still doubting me, so here's a specific example.
In the climax of the film, the Major is forced to square off against a tank by herself. Using her wits, she manages to get on top of the tank and attempts to access the panel to the inside. What follows is one of the more memorable moments in anime history. As we watch the Major try to pry off the hatch, we see her cybernetic body start to warp and deform under the stress. The synthetic skin soon rips, and we start to see the machinery beneath. Eventually, her body can't take it, and it fails, leaving her helpless for the tank to crush her.
Now, while she did fail to crack the tank, the scene still drives home the point that Motoko is a badass. Okay? I mean, she faced down a tank. A tank! How many of you can say that you've done the same? Okay, bad example. Point still stands. Motoko's a badass and you do not want to fuck with her.
Don't you dare open another tab. Judge of Character will be right back. See, I told you the show would come back.
Now, the next subject I'm going to talk about is one I don't normally bring up, mainly because it doesn't need to be brought up all that often. And also because I don't want people pleasuring themselves to my show. But, in regards to this character, I am going to have to discuss it because it is kind of important. It's one of those things that helps make the character even more awesome in its own strange little way. And what is the subject? Her sexuality.
Now, when I say her sexuality, I'm not referring to her orientation. Whether she's into men or women isn't important. What is important is how her apparent sex appeal is handled in the story. And yes, this is important. If you haven't noticed by now, the Major's wardrobe is kinda bare. With the exception of official formal events or missions where it's impractical, the Major's civvies are basically lingerie. Basically, she likes to show skin. A lot.
Which naturally has caused quite a bit of Rule 34. And if you don't know what Rule 34 is, trust me, it's better if you don't.
But can all this be considered titillating? Consider this. Any and all nudity in Ghost in the Shell comes from cyborgs and androids, beings with fake bodies. Basically, extreme implants. Ignoring the obvious fact that these are animations either way, you're not seeing real boobs here, people. So how can there be a nudity taboo or any sort of aspect of arousal connected to them?
Well, okay, to that last question, it's because people are perverts. However, it does reveal an interesting aspect about the character. Her not wearing a whole lot of clothes actually kind of makes sense.
We learn in the series that the Major's body is a style of body that was popular shortly before the start of the show, and in the film we see a brief moment where she sees someone else with her exact same body. So it's safe to say that there are numerous people walking around with the Major's same external body with only a few minor aesthetic changes. With this in mind, knowing that there could be hundreds of people who have the exact same body as you, it's silly to have such a nudity taboo. And this sort of thinking, as odd as it might be, is actually a point in favor of the character. Because, let's face it, we've got a problem with nudity.
Then there's the fact that in her line of work, the Major's physical body is more of a tool. Kind of like a gun or armor. And we're not exactly modest about our wrenches or our hammers, now are we? Of course, naturally, talking about the Major's sexuality would lead me to discuss another interesting element about her. Her gender.
I can't wait for the day when a character's gender doesn't have anything to do with how great they are. But until such time, it must be mentioned. Now, there's not a shortage of awesome female characters, but they are few and far between. Thankfully, most of them stand out, and the Major is no exception. As already stated, she's the leader of an anti-terrorist unit second only to Chief Aramaki, her boss. She's also an ace hacker, an expert marksman, and, well, just an overall badass. The fact that she's a woman also helps further to drive the point home. Or does it?
Well, at least in the current times, here in the real world, it does. But, and this is important, in the world of Ghost in the Shell, it's really not that big of a deal.
Remember, according to Ghost in the Shell, in the future people will have the option of putting themselves into fully prosthetic bodies, which means that changing your gender would be as simple as putting on a shirt, in a manner of speaking. When you take this into consideration, the whole gender inequality issue, at least in Ghost in the Shell, takes on a new light. Simply put, there is no gender, at least among those who are cyborgs.
Since they're more machine than human, and since the part that's human is basically a lump of brain cells, the idea of gender inequality is laughable. But what does that, if anything, have to do with how awesome the Major is?
Not much, actually. In the grand scheme of things, we applaud the Major as being an awesome female character, but in reality, she has no gender. So what are we applauding? Basically, we're applauding the image of a strong female character. Even though she technically no longer has a sex, the fact that she visually represents women is enough. Confusing, I know, so let me sum up. The Major is still an awesome female character, although we really shouldn't classify her as a female. She's cyborg, something altogether new and different, and not subject to our foibles of flesh and blood conventions.
All this talk about sexuality and gender conventions and how they relate to cyborgs actually reminds me of another important part of the character. the philosophical aspect.
Now, to be fair, when discussing philosophy and Ghost in the Shell, you're talking more about the show itself, but that doesn't mean the major doesn't have a place in it all. Ghost in the Shell is known as much for its intellectual elements as its action and science fiction. The works regularly seek to question multiple concepts, such as the worth of mankind, spirituality, and other philosophical constructs. I won't go into great detail here because I'm sure you all have other things to do. If you are curious about these things, though, might I recommend Google?
But what does the major have to do with all of this? Well, she basically acts as a sort of avatar for the audience.
Whenever these philosophical discussions come up, more often than not, the major is involved somehow, either offering her own views and thoughts on it, or being right in the middle of the action. She also helps to essentially explain the finer points of these discussions, so that those of us without master's degrees in philosophy can understand. That may not seem like a whole lot, but trust me, when the show starts really getting into it, you're gonna need the help.
Whew. Well, I think that's enough to mention, so let's say we wrap this up, eh?
The long and short of it is this. Major Motoko Kusanagi is an awesome character for a variety of reasons. She's a kick-ass action hero in an awesome cyberpunk setting. She's bold, fearless, damn attractive even for a cyborg, and is an intellectual joy of a character. If you're gonna get into anime, you really can't go wrong with this franchise or this character.
Just pay attention. Trust me, you miss one detail, you're screwed for the rest of the show. And in any case, I'm your host Steve, reminding all of you to stay in character. And Happy New Year, everybody! Let's hope this year was a lot better than the last.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this episode of Judge of Character, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe. And be sure to check out other episodes to see what I have to say about some of your favorite characters. Until next time, stay wicked.
Ha 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 ha!